From a British spy inspired by real Iraqi WMD intelligence, lies to Sean Connery demanding multiple bathrooms in his hotel, Michael Bay's 1996 action thriller The Rock is packed with bizarre behind-the-scenes secrets that are stranger than its explosive plot. This seemingly straightforward Alcatraz adventure hides everything from Quentin Tarantino's uncredited rewrites to a former Navy SEAL accidentally ruining stunts, plus Nicolas Cage's obsession with avoiding profanity that shaped his entire character. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about The Rock 1996. Fact 1. Sean Connery's multiple bathroom mystery. When most A-list actors negotiate their contracts for big-budget movies, they typically demand things like private jets, luxury trailers, or massive paychecks. But Sean Connery had a much more unusual requirement during the filming of The Rock in 1996, and it remains one of the most puzzling requests in Hollywood history. According to Jonathan Shedd, the film's location manager, when the production team was scouting hotels for Connery to stay at during the San Francisco shoot, the legendary actor had one very specific and bizarre criteria that left everyone scratching their heads. Connery's main requirement for his hotel accommodations was multiple bathrooms, and when pressed for an explanation, he offered absolutely none. The production team ultimately found Connery a suite at the Hyatt Hotel in San Francisco's financial district that met his mysterious bathroom requirements. But to this day, nobody involved with the film has any idea why he needed so many restrooms. Shedd later revealed that this strange demand became their primary directive when hotel hunting, even though it made no logical sense to anyone on the crew. This wasn't the only odd accommodation request Connery made during filming. There were also widespread rumors that he had demanded the producers build him a cabin on Alcatraz Island, so he wouldn't have to travel back and forth from the mainland every day. However, these stories turned out to be completely false when Nicolas Cage debunked them years later, calling the cabin tale an exaggeration that had grown into internet legend. What actually happened was even stranger than the fake cabin story. Connery had reportedly asked permission to anchor his personal yacht off the dock at Alcatraz Island, which would have allowed him to stay near the filming location in luxurious comfort. Unfortunately for the former James Bond actor, the Coast Guard denied this request for security reasons, leaving him stuck with the mysterious multiple bathroom hotel arrangement instead. The bathroom mystery has never been solved, and Connery took the secret of why he needed so many toilets with him. It remains one of the most inexplicable behind-the-scenes demands in movie history, proving that even legendary actors have their own peculiar quirks that defy all explanation. Fact 2. The Alcatraz cabin myth was fake. For nearly 20 years, one of the most repeated stories about The Rock's production was that Sean Connery had convinced the producers to build him a personal cabin on Alcatraz Island, so he wouldn't have to make the daily ferry trip back and forth to the mainland. This tale became so widespread on the internet that it appeared on major movie websites and trivia pages, with many sources claiming that the studio actually gave in to this demanding request and constructed makeshift lodging for the former James Bond star. The story seemed believable because it fit perfectly with Connery's reputation for making unusual demands during film productions, and Alcatraz Island certainly had enough space for temporary structures. Movie fans loved sharing this anecdote as proof of how far studios would go to accommodate A-list actors, and it became one of the most famous behind-the-scenes stories associated with the 1996 action thriller. However, in 2023, Nicolas Cage finally set the record straight during an interview, calling the cabin story a complete fabrication and dismissing it as internet mythology that had spiraled out of control. When pressed for details, Cage revealed that the truth was actually much stranger than the fake cabin tale that had been circulating for decades. Jonathan Shedd, who worked as the film's location manager, confirmed Cage's debunking by explaining what really happened during the production. According to Shedd, no cabin was ever built on Alcatraz Island for Connery or anyone else involved with the movie. Instead, Connery had a standard trailer on the island where he could rest between takes. just like many other actors do on film sets. The real story behind the accommodation rumors was that Connery had actually asked permission to anchor his personal yacht off the dock at Alcatraz Island, which would have allowed him to stay in luxury while remaining close to the filming location. This request was far more extravagant than a simple cabin, as it would have involved bringing a private vessel into the waters around the former federal prison. Unfortunately for Connery, the Coast Guard denied his yacht request for security and safety reasons, leaving him with no choice but to commute daily from his hotel in San Francisco, like everyone else on the production crew. Fact 3. Real Iraqi WMD intelligence hoax. In what might be the most bizarre case of life imitating art in modern history, a Michael Bay action movie directly influenced real-world intelligence reports that helped justify a major military conflict. According to the official Chilcot inquiry, which investigated Britain's role in the Iraq War, The Rock became the unlikely source material for false intelligence reports about Saddam Hussein's supposed chemical weapons program. The story begins in September 2002, when MI6 chief Sir Richard Dearlove told British intelligence officials that they had acquired information from a news source, revealing that Iraq was dramatically increasing its production of chemical and biological warfare agents. The source claimed to have direct access to senior Iraqi staff who were supposedly working 7 days a week, while the regime concentrated massive effort on producing deadly substances like anthrax. This intelligence seemed credible enough that Dearlove informed the chairman of the Joint Intelligence Committee that they were on the edge of a significant breakthrough that could be the key to unlocking Iraq's entire weapons program. British officials believed they finally had the smoking gun evidence they needed to prove that Saddam Hussein was continuing to develop weapons of mass destruction in defiance of international sanctions. However, the Chilcot inquiry later revealed that this seemingly vital intelligence was completely fabricated by a false agent who had based his detailed reports directly on the plot and technical details from The Rock. The agent had essentially watched Michael Bay's movie about VX gas attacks and terrorist threats, then repackaged the fictional scenario as real intelligence about Iraqi chemical weapons capabilities. David Weisberg, one of The Rock's screenwriters, expressed his shock when he learned about the connection years later. He pointed out that anyone in the chemical weapons community would have immediately recognized the reports as complete nonsense if they had done even basic fact-checking, since the movie's portrayal of VX gas and chemical weapons was deliberately exaggerated for dramatic effect rather than scientific accuracy. Weisberg noted that while he wasn't surprised that a desperate intelligence agent might resort to using films for inspiration, he was dismayed that British authorities apparently failed to do the most basic verification of the information before treating it as credible intelligence that influenced major policy decisions. Fact 4. Quentin Tarantino and Aaron Sorkin were secret writers. While The Rock officially credits David Weisberg, Douglas Cook, and Mark Rosner as its screenwriters, the movie actually had 2 secret Hollywood heavyweights working behind the scenes who never received any public recognition for their contributions. Both Quentin Tarantino and Aaron Sorkin worked as uncredited script doctors on the film, adding their distinctive touches to what would become one of the most entertaining action movies of the 1990s. During the mid-1990s, after the massive success of A Few Good Men, Aaron Sorkin was making a living as a script doctor in Hollywood, polishing and rewriting screenplays for major studio productions. Michael Bay, producer Jerry Bruckheimer, and Don Simpson hired Sorkin, along with several other writers, to work on The Rock's script, though it remains unclear exactly which scenes Sorkin was personally responsible for creating or improving. However, film experts have noted that several scenes involving the White House and government officials bear a striking resemblance to the sharp, rapid-fire dialogue that would later become Sorkin's trademark in his television series, The West Wing. The political conversations and bureaucratic exchanges in The Rock seem to carry the same intelligent, witty tone that Sorkin would perfect in his later work. Quentin Tarantino's involvement as an uncredited script doctor is even more intriguing, especially when you consider some of the movie's most memorable and unusual scenes. Film critics have pointed out that the famous scene where a character must inject atropine directly into his heart to survive VX gas poisoning bears an unmistakable similarity to the adrenaline injection scene in Tarantino's Pulp Fiction, which had been released just 2 years earlier in 1994. The heart injection technique appears in both films as a dramatic life-or-death medical procedure, and while the specific circumstances are different, the visual and emotional impact of both scenes is remarkably similar. This connection suggests that Tarantino may have contributed this particular dramatic element to The Rock's script, bringing his signature style of mixing dark humor with intense violence to Michael Bay's action-packed thriller. Jonathan Hensleigh was also brought in as another uncredited writer, creating a situation where multiple talented screenwriters were secretly collaborating to polish the final script. Fact 5. Zeuss's butthole was Nicolas Cage's baby. One of the most quotable and memorable lines in The Rock almost never made it into the final movie. And it only exists because Nicolas Cage fought tooth and nail to keep his bizarre improvisation in the script. When Cage's character, Stanley Goodspeed, discovers that Sean Connery's John Mason has somehow escaped from his cell, he delivers the now famous outburst asking how, in the name of Zeuss's butthole, Mason managed to get out. But this colorful exclamation was completely unscripted and came directly from Cage's own creative mind. According to multiple sources involved with the production, much of Nicolas Cage's dialogue throughout The Rock was actually improvised during filming rather than written in the original screenplay. Director Michael Bay had encouraged the actors to experiment with their lines and add their own personality to the characters, which gave Cage the freedom to inject his trademark quirky energy into the role of the nervous FBI chemical weapons expert. The Zeuss's butthole line perfectly captured Cage's approach to the character, combining genuine shock and frustration with an absurdly creative way of expressing disbelief that fit perfectly with Goodspeed's nerdy, intellectual personality. However, when Michael Bay heard the line during filming, his initial reaction was to cut it from the movie because he thought it might be too strange or inappropriate for the final cut. Cage had other ideas about keeping his improvised dialogue, and he insisted that the Zeuss reference should stay in the film because it represented exactly the kind of thing his character would say in that moment of complete bewilderment. The actor argued that the line was both funny and authentic to Goodspeed's personality, since an FBI scientist might very well use such an unusual expression when faced with something that seemed impossible. This wasn't the only example of Cage's creative input shaping his character's dialogue throughout the movie. It was also Cage's idea that Stanley Goodspeed would avoid using traditional profanity throughout the film, instead relying on creative euphemisms like "gee whiz" and other mild expressions that fit with the character's more intellectual and less aggressive personality compared to the military characters surrounding him. Fact 6. Navy SEAL ruined stunt by being too helpful. During the filming of The Rock, a well-intentioned former Navy SEAL accidentally destroyed an expensive stunt sequence because his military training kicked in at exactly the wrong moment. Harry Humphreys, who had served as a Navy SEAL and was working as a Hollywood action movie consultant on the production, showed up on the Alcatraz set one day just as the crew was filming a dangerous fire stunt involving a stuntman who was supposed to be suspended in the air while completely engulfed in flames. The Rock featured numerous complex action sequences that required careful coordination between stunt performers, special effects teams, and safety crews to ensure that everything went according to plan. Fire stunts are particularly challenging because they involve real flames and genuine danger, even with all the proper safety precautions in place. So timing is absolutely critical to both capture the dramatic footage and protect the stunt performer from serious injury. When Humphreys arrived on set and witnessed what appeared to be a man on fire hanging helplessly in the air, his Navy SEAL training immediately took over, and he reacted exactly as he had been taught during his military service. Without hesitation, Humphreys grabbed the nearest fire extinguisher and rushed to put out the flames, completely focused on saving what he believed was someone in serious danger who needed immediate rescue. Unfortunately, Humphreys had no idea that he was watching a carefully choreographed stunt sequence that that was being filmed with multiple cameras to capture the dramatic action for the movie. The stunt performer was actually safe and protected by specialized equipment and fire-resistant materials, and the entire scene had been planned down to the second to ensure both safety and cinematic impact. By the time the film crew could explain what was happening, Humphreys had already extinguished the flames and completely ruined the take, forcing the production team to reset all their equipment and start the expensive and time-consuming stunt sequence over again from the beginning. While everyone appreciated Humphreys' quick thinking and heroic instincts, the incident became a memorable example of how real-world training can sometimes interfere with the carefully controlled chaos of movie making, even when the intentions are completely good. Fact 7. Tourists watched secret Alcatraz filming. One of the most unusual aspects of filming The Rock was that the production had to accommodate thousands of curious tourists who were wandering around Alcatraz Island, watching a major Hollywood movie being made right in front of them. Since Alcatraz operates as a national park under the control of the National Park Service, it was impossible for the film crew to close the island to the public during shooting, which created a bizarre situation where paying visitors got an unexpected behind-the-scenes look at Michael Bay's action thriller. Throughout most of the filming process in 1995, regular tour groups continued to arrive on Alcatraz Island via ferry boats, just as they had been doing for years before The Rock came along. These tourists, who had paid for guided tours of the famous former federal prison, suddenly found themselves walking through active movie sets where Sean Connery, Nicolas Cage, and Ed Harris were filming dramatic scenes with explosions, gunfire, and elaborate stunts happening all around them. The production team had to carefully coordinate their shooting schedule around the steady stream of tour parties, making sure that filming could continue while still allowing visitors to see the historical sites they had come to experience. This meant that many scenes had to be shot in short bursts between tour groups, and the crew often had to pause filming entirely when large crowds of tourists needed to pass through areas where cameras were rolling. For the lucky visitors who happened to be on Alcatraz during filming, it was like getting two attractions for the price of one, as they could explore the notorious prison while also watching a big-budget Hollywood production in action. Many tourists undoubtedly went home with stories about seeing famous actors working on what would become one of the most popular action movies of the decade. However, this unusual arrangement came to an abrupt end on December 15, 1995, when the federal government partially shut down Alcatraz Island due to stalled budget negotiations in Washington. While the government shutdown created major inconveniences across the country, it actually worked out perfectly for The Rock's production team because they could finally film their remaining scenes without having to work around constant interruptions from curious tourists wandering through their sets. Fact 8. The Beatles' record cost $600. In one of the early scenes of The Rock, Nicolas Cage's character, Stanley Goodspeed, makes what seems like a casual purchase of a Beatles vinyl record, but the album he buys actually cost the production team around $600 because it was an extremely rare and valuable collector's item. The record in question was Meet the Beatles, which was the band's second official release in the United States and contains some of their earliest popular songs that helped launch Beatlemania in America. The reason this particular album commanded such a high price was that it was almost certainly a first pressing in mint condition, which means it was one of the original records manufactured when the album was first released, and had been kept in nearly perfect condition over the decades. First pressings of classic Beatles albums are among the most sought-after items in the record-collecting world, and their value has only increased over time as fewer pristine copies remain available. What makes this detail even more interesting is that Stanley Goodspeed, as portrayed in the film, is clearly established as a serious music enthusiast and Beatles fan who would have known exactly what he was buying. As an FBI scientist with refined tastes, Goodspeed would have understood that the mono version of Meet the Beatles actually sounds better than the stereo version because the Beatles were personally present for the mono mixing sessions at Abbey Road Studios, while the stereo mixes were created later by other engineers without the band's direct input. This attention to audio quality was particularly important for vinyl records in the 1990s, since compact discs had not yet reached the level of remastering technology that would later make digital versions of Beatles songs sound as good as the original vinyl pressings. For a true audiophile like Goodspeed, owning a first-pressing monocopy of Meet the Beatles would have been the ultimate way to experience these classic songs, the way the Beatles intended them to be heard. The fact that the production team was willing to spend $600 on a single prop record shows how much attention to detail went into creating Goodspeed's character, establishing him as someone who values quality and authenticity even in his personal hobbies and interests outside of his work as a chemical weapons expert. Fact 9. Hotel balcony scene caused real panic. When the Rock's film crew decided to shoot one of their most dramatic scenes at the luxurious Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco, they accidentally created a public panic that had hotel staff fielding emergency phone calls from terrified witnesses who thought they were watching a real crime in progress. The scene in question involved FBI Director Womack being grabbed by Sean Connery's character John Mason and dangled over a high balcony in a moment of intense confrontation, but the realistic nature of the stunt caused serious alarm among people who had no idea that a movie was being filmed. The Fairmont Hotel sits prominently in San Francisco's financial district and is visible from numerous other buildings, streets, and public areas throughout the downtown area, which meant that when the film crew began shooting their balcony scene, dozens of unsuspecting bystanders had clear views of what appeared to be a violent assault taking place. From the perspective of people watching from nearby office buildings or walking on the streets below, it looked exactly like someone was being attacked and thrown off a hotel balcony in broad daylight. The situation became even more realistic and frightening because the stunt was performed with professional precision, using safety equipment and techniques that were completely invisible to distant observers who could only see a man dangling helplessly from a high balcony while appearing to struggle for his life. The hotel's location in such a busy part of the city meant that numerous people witnessed different parts of the scene as it was being filmed multiple times from various camera angles. Within minutes of the filming beginning, the Fairmont Hotel's phone lines were flooded with calls from concerned citizens reporting what they believed was a serious crime in progress, with callers describing seeing someone being thrown off a balcony and demanding that security or police respond immediately. Hotel staff had to repeatedly explain to frightened callers that they were witnessing a controlled movie stunt rather than an actual emergency, but many people remained skeptical until they could see the film equipment and crew members for themselves. The incident highlights how realistic modern movie stunts can appear to casual observers, especially when they're performed at recognizable public locations where people don't expect to see Hollywood productions taking place. Fact 10. Major Tom reference hidden in character. The Rock contains a cleverly hidden musical reference that most viewers completely miss, embedded in the name of one of the film's key military characters. Major Tom Baxter, played by David Morse as General Hummel's loyal second-in-command, carries a first name that was deliberately chosen as a subtle nod to David Bowie's famous fictional astronaut Major Tom from the classic song Space Oddity, which was released in 1969 and became one of Bowie's most recognizable hits. This musical Easter egg fits perfectly with The Rock's other space and astronaut-themed references that are woven throughout the film in ways that many audience members never consciously noticed. The most obvious example occurs during an intimate scene between Stanley Goodspeed and his girlfriend Carla, where Elton John's Rocket Man plays in the background as they spend time together on their apartment rooftop, establishing the rocket and space exploration themes that will become important later in the story. The Rocket Man connection becomes even more significant when Goodspeed later kills Captain Darrow using an actual rocket launcher, creating a darkly ironic callback to the romantic song that was playing during his peaceful moment with Carla earlier in the film. This creates a deliberate contrast between the gentle, dreamy nature of Elton John's song about space travel and the violent, explosive reality of the rocket weapons that Goodspeed must use to survive his mission on Alcatraz Island. The Major Tom reference adds another layer to this pattern of space-related names and songs. Since David Bowie's character represents an astronaut who becomes lost and disconnected during his mission, which mirrors the isolation and dangerous circumstances that all the characters in The Rock face when they become trapped on Alcatraz, with deadly chemical weapons threatening the entire San Francisco Bay Area. These musical references demonstrate how the screenwriters and filmmakers incorporated subtle artistic touches into what might otherwise be seen as a straightforward action movie, creating connections between popular songs about space exploration and the high-stakes military mission that drives the film's plot. The fact that most viewers never consciously recognize these references makes them even more effective as subtle storytelling devices that add depth without being obvious or heavy-handed. Fact 11. Don Simpson's death was hidden from cast. During the production of The Rock, the cast and crew made a collective decision to keep devastating news secret from director Michael Bay in order to protect the film from being derailed by tragedy. Don Simpson, one of the movie's key producers and half of the legendary Simpson-Bruckheimer partnership that had created some of Hollywood's biggest action hits, died unexpectedly during filming, but the people working on the movie agreed to hide this information from Bay so he could continue focusing on completing the production. Don Simpson had been instrumental in developing The Rock from its earliest stages, working alongside his longtime partner Jerry Bruckheimer to shape the project into the high-octane action thriller that audiences would eventually see in theaters. Simpson was particularly responsible for creating the complex character of General Hummel, drawing inspiration from real-world stories about the government's treatment of military families and veterans to create a villain who had understandable motivations for his extreme actions. The decision to keep Simpson's death secret was made by people who understood how devastating the news would be for Bay, who was still relatively early in his directing career and had developed a close working relationship with both Simpson and Bruckheimer during the making of the film. Everyone involved with the production knew that learning about Simpson's sudden passing could completely disrupt Bay's ability to concentrate on the complicated logistics of filming an action movie on location at Alcatraz Island. The conspiracy of silence worked for a considerable period of time, allowing Bay to continue directing scenes with Sean Connery, Nicolas Cage, and Ed Harris without being distracted by grief or concerns about how Simpson's death might affect the movie's future. The cast and crew managed to maintain their secret through careful coordination and by making sure that Bay was kept away from any conversations or situations where he might accidentally learn the truth. However, the plan eventually fell apart when Nicolas Cage inadvertently revealed the news to Bay in what was later described as a typically awkward Cage moment. The revelation finally forced everyone to acknowledge the loss and deal with the emotional impact of continuing production without one of their key creative partners. But by that point, enough of the filming had been completed that the movie could move forward to completion. Fact 12. F-18s had wrong military branch labels. The Rock contains a glaring military accuracy error that military aviation experts immediately spotted, involving the fighter jets used during the film's dramatic bombing sequence near the end of the movie. The FA-18 Hornets that appear on screen preparing to launch thermite plasma bombs at Alcatraz Island are clearly labeled with U.S. Air Force markings on their fuselages. But this represents a fundamental mistake about which branch of the military actually operates these aircraft in real life. In reality, FA-18 Hornets are exclusively flown by the United States Navy and Marine Corps and have never been part of the Air Force's aircraft inventory at any point in their operational history. The Air Force operates different types of fighter jets that are specifically designed for their particular mission requirements, while the Navy and Marines use FA-18s because they are engineered to handle the unique challenges of aircraft carrier operations and close air support for ground troops. The mistake becomes even more obvious to aviation enthusiasts because the same aircraft mock-ups used in The Rock actually display real USMC VMFA 134 squadron markings along other parts of the fuselage, creating a confusing mix of accurate and inaccurate military designations on the same plane. This suggests that the prop department either didn't understand the significance of the different markings or simply didn't realize that combining Air Force labels with Marine Corps squadron information would create an impossible military aircraft. Interestingly, these exact same incorrectly labeled F.A-18 mock-ups were later reused in the film Independence Day, where they appeared in reshoots with the same erroneous U.S. Air Force markings that had already been spotted by sharp-eyed viewers of The Rock. This means that the same mistake was repeated across multiple major Hollywood productions, suggesting that prop departments in the 1990s were not always careful about verifying the accuracy of military details. The error highlights how even big-budget action movies can overlook important technical details that might seem minor to general audiences but are immediately obvious to people with military knowledge or aviation experience. While most moviegoers probably never noticed the incorrect markings, military personnel and aircraft enthusiasts certainly did, making this one of The Rock's most frequently cited factual mistakes in online discussions about the film's realism. Fact 13. Real SEALs played fake SEALs. The Rock achieved an unusually high level of military authenticity by casting actual Navy SEALs to play the fictional SEAL team members in the movie, but this decision created an unexpected problem for one of the film's lead actors, who found himself completely intimidated by working alongside real Special Forces operators. Michael Biehn, who played Commander Anderson and was supposed to be the leader of the SEAL team, discovered that pretending to command actual Navy SEALs was far more challenging than he had anticipated when he first accepted the role. Biehn had extensive experience playing military characters throughout his career, having portrayed soldiers and special forces operatives in films like The Terminator, Aliens, and The Abyss, so he was certainly no stranger to action roles that required him to appear competent and authoritative in combat situations. However, all of his previous military roles had involved acting alongside other professional actors who were also pretending to be soldiers, which created a completely different dynamic than what he encountered on The Rock's set. When Biehn found himself surrounded by genuine Navy SEALs who had years of real combat training and operational experience, he began to freeze up during filming because he felt like a fraud trying to give orders to people who actually knew how to do everything his character was supposed to be an expert at. The psychological pressure of pretending to lead men who had genuine Special Forces credentials proved to be overwhelming for an actor who was used to working with other performers who were equally inexperienced with actual military procedures. The situation became even more difficult because Biehn was also working closely with Sean Connery, whose commanding screen presence and decades of experience playing authoritative characters added another layer of intimidation to an already challenging filming environment. Biehn later admitted that he told director Michael Bay about his struggles with feeling confident while acting alongside both the real SEALs and the legendary Connery, who seemed completely comfortable in every scene, regardless of how intense the action became. This casting choice of using actual Navy SEALs alongside professional actors demonstrates how filmmakers sometimes prioritize authenticity in ways that can create unexpected challenges for the performers who have to interact with real military personnel while maintaining their fictional characters. Fact 14. Premiere held in Alcatraz prison yard. The Rock's premiere was held in one of the most unusual and thematically perfect locations in movie history, taking place in the actual prison recreation yard on Alcatraz Island, where much of the film had been shot months earlier. This decision to hold the premiere at the same location where the action thriller was filmed created an unprecedented movie event that perfectly captured the spirit of the film while giving guests an unforgettable experience they could never have at a traditional Hollywood theater. Alcatraz Island had already established itself as one of the most iconic filming locations in cinema history, having been used for classic movies like Escape from Alcatraz with Clint Eastwood, Point Blank, and Murder in the First. But hosting an actual movie premiere in the former federal prison took the island's connection to Hollywood to an entirely new level. The prison recreation yard, where inmates had once spent their limited outdoor time during the prison's operational years, was transformed into an open-air movie theater, complete with a large screen and seating for the cast, crew, and invited guests. The setting created an atmosphere that was both glamorous and haunting, as premiere attendees watched Sean Connery, Nicolas Cage, and Ed Harris on the big screen, while sitting in the exact same location where real prisoners had once walked, and where the movie's fictional characters had battled with deadly chemical weapons just months before. The contrast between Hollywood glamour and the harsh reality of the prison environment added an extra layer of meaning to the viewing experience that no traditional premiere venue could have provided. For the actors and filmmakers involved with The Rock, watching their completed work, while surrounded by the actual walls and buildings where they had spent weeks filming intense action sequences, must have created a uniquely emotional and satisfying experience. The premiere allowed everyone involved with the production to see how their individual contributions had come together to create the finished film, all while being reminded of the challenging conditions and logistics they had overcome during the actual filming process. This creative approach to hosting a movie premiere demonstrated how filmmakers can use unconventional venues to create memorable events that enhance the connection between a movie and its real-world filming locations. Fact 15. Criterion Collection's shocking choice. The Rock achieved something that shocked both film critics and movie collectors when it became part of the prestigious Criterion Collection, a distributor that built its reputation by releasing what they describe as important, classic, and contemporary films and cinema at its finest. The Criterion Collection typically focuses on arthouse movies, foreign films, and critically acclaimed dramas that are considered essential viewing for serious film students and cinephiles, making Michael Bay's explosive action thriller one of the most unexpected additions to their carefully curated catalog. The Criterion Collection has traditionally been the home for directors like Akira Kurosawa, Ingmar Bergman, and Federico Fellini, along with groundbreaking American films that are studied in film schools around the world for their artistic merit and cultural significance. When movie enthusiasts think of Criterion releases, they typically imagine black-and-white masterpieces, experimental cinema, or deeply intellectual films that require multiple viewings to fully appreciate, not high-octane summer blockbusters filled with explosions and car chases. The decision to include The Rock in their collection was so surprising that it raised serious questions about whether Criterion was abandoning its commitment to arthouse cinema in favor of more commercially appealing titles that would attract mainstream audiences. Film critics and collectors debated whether a Michael Bay movie could legitimately be considered cinema at its finest, especially when the director was known for prioritizing spectacular action sequences and visual effects over character development and narrative depth. However, Criterion defended their choice by pointing to The Rock's entertainment value and technical craftsmanship, with respected film critic Roger Ebert writing a supportive essay for the release that praised the movie as a first-rate action thriller with style and humor. The collection's essay noted that The Rock succeeded brilliantly at what it was trying to accomplish, even if its goals were different from the typical Criterion film. The Rock's inclusion opened the door for other mainstream blockbusters to be considered for Criterion treatment, and it remains one of the most controversial choices in the collection's history. The release proved that even prestigious film distributors sometimes recognize that pure entertainment value and technical excellence can be worthy of preservation alongside more traditionally artistic cinema.